was probably the greatest loss creatively that I've had. Is a dream project, and you're already touted and kind of publicly put out there.
You think you know The Thin Red Line as Terrence Malick's beautiful war epic, but the real battle was happening behind the cameras between Hollywood's most mysterious director and some of its biggest stars. Sean Penn, Jim Caviezel, and Nick Nolte thought they were making a traditional war film, but Malick had other plans. Plans so radical, they would leave major actors completely cut from the final movie. What you're about to discover will shock you.
Pass out. Why hell, they'll just have to pass out.
A director who disappeared for 20 years only to return with methods so unconventional, they drove cast and crew to madness. Million-dollar performances left on the cutting room floor, and a production where the line between philosophy and filmmaking completely vanished. The jungle was real, but the war Malick was fighting was against Hollywood itself. Terrence Malick. Director, let's start with Terrence Malick himself. The enigmatic filmmaker whose 20-year absence from Hollywood had become legendary, and whose return with The Thin Red Line would prove even more shocking than his disappearance. But what most people don't realize is that Malick's hiatus wasn't artistic temperament. It was a complete rejection of everything Hollywood represented, and his comeback was designed to destroy traditional filmmaking from within. Malick's preparation for The Thin Red Line began not with James Jones's novel, but with years of studying philosophy, theology, and environmental science in complete isolation. While other directors were making commercial films, Malick was living like a hermit, reading Heidegger and Wittgenstein, trying to understand the relationship between human violence and natural beauty. His neighbors in Austin, Texas, reported seeing him sitting motionless in fields for hours, observing grass, insects, and light patterns with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The most shocking secret about Malick's approach was his complete disregard for traditional narrative structure. He shot The Thin Red Line like a nature documentary that happened to include human actors, filming thousands of hours of footage without a conventional script. Actors arrived on set expecting clearly defined characters and dialogue, only to discover that Malick was more interested in capturing spontaneous moments of philosophical reflection than telling a coherent war story. But here's what stunned even veteran actors. Malick's direction consisted mostly of whispered questions about existence, mortality, and the meaning of suffering. Instead of giving performance notes, he would ask actors to contemplate their relationship with death while standing in beautiful landscapes. Sean Penn later described working with Malick as less like making a movie and more like attending philosophy seminars in paradise. The most devastating truth about Malick's method was his editing process, where he treated major performances like raw material to be sculpted into his personal vision. He shot for 6 months, then spent 2 years in the editing room cutting entire storylines and characters that didn't serve his philosophical agenda. Actors who thought they were playing lead roles discovered they had been reduced to brief appearances or eliminated entirely. Sean Penn, First Sergeant Edward Welsh. Sean Penn's relationship with Terrence Malick became one of Hollywood's most unusual collaborations. But the secrets behind their working dynamic reveal an actor who served as translator between Malick's mystical vision and the practical needs of a film production. Penn didn't just play First Sergeant Welsh. He became Malick's on-set philosopher and the film's spiritual anchor. Penn's preparation for Welsh went far beyond typical military research. At Malick's suggestion, he spent months studying Eastern philosophy, particularly Buddhist concepts of suffering and acceptance. Penn read the Bhagavad Gita, Marcus Aurelius, and contemporary war poetry, trying to understand how a career soldier might develop a philosophical worldview in the face of constant death and violence. The most shocking aspect of Penn's performance was how much of it was improvised philosophy rather than scripted dialogue. Malick would place Penn in beautiful natural settings and ask him to speak extemporaneously about war, death, and human nature. Many of Welsh's most memorable speeches were Penn's own thoughts, filtered through his character's military experience and shaped by months of philosophical study. But here's what stunned the other actors. Penn became Malick's unofficial assistant director, helping translate the director's abstract concepts into practical guidance for confused cast members. When actors couldn't understand what Malik wanted, they would turn to Penn for interpretation. This unique role gave Penn unprecedented influence over the film's development and helped him understand Malik's unconventional methods. Penn's deleted scenes were extensive enough to constitute an entirely different movie. Malik shot hours of Penn delivering philosophical monologues, debating the nature of evil with other characters, and reflecting on his military career. These scenes, if included, would have made Welsh the film's clear protagonist, but Malik's editing process favored visual poetry over character development, leaving Penn's most powerful performances unseen. Jim Caviezel, Private Robert Witt. Jim Caviezel's casting as Private Witt was perhaps Malik's most inspired choice, but the secrets behind his preparation reveal an actor whose own spiritual journey became inseparable from his character's philosophical awakening. Caviezel didn't just play a soldier questioning the meaning of war, he became a vessel for Malik's exploration of innocence in a violent world. Caviezel's most profound preparation involved what he called spiritual archaeology, attempting to understand how a simple soldier might develop complex philosophical insights through exposure to death and natural beauty. At Malik's direction, Caviezel spent weeks in meditation, studying Christian mysticism and indigenous spiritual practices, trying to embody a character who saw divine presence in the midst of human horror. The most challenging aspect of Caviezel's performance was delivering Malik's stream of consciousness voiceovers, which were written as philosophical poetry rather than traditional dialogue. These internal monologues required Caviezel to speak as if his thoughts were prayers, addressing unseen spiritual forces while describing the brutality of war. The emotional demands of this approach were so intense that Caviezel sometimes broke down during recording sessions. But here's what shocked even Malik. Caviezel's own religious beliefs began to merge with his character's spiritual journey in ways that blurred the line between performance and personal transformation. Caviezel started viewing the production as a kind of pilgrimage, seeing his fellow actors as fellow seekers on a spiritual path rather than professional colleagues working on a movie. Caviezel's physical preparation involved not just military training, but learning to move through natural environments with the reverence Malik demanded. He studied how indigenous peoples interacted with landscapes, trying to embody a character who saw a sacred presence in trees, water, and light. This preparation helped create Witt's unique perspective as a soldier who remained spiritually connected to the natural world despite witnessing human brutality. Nick Nolte, Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Tall. Nick Nolte's transformation into Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Tall became one of the film's most explosive performances. But the secrets behind his preparation reveal an actor channeling his own personal demons into a character who represented everything toxic about military hierarchy and American ambition. Nolte didn't just play a brutal commander, he became the embodiment of institutional violence and moral corruption. Nolte's most shocking preparation involved extensive research into military officers who had advanced their careers through the sacrifice of their subordinates. He studied court-martial records, read accounts of incompetent World War II commanders, and interviewed veterans who had served under officers more concerned with promotion than soldier welfare. This research revealed a pattern of institutional brutality that horrified Nolte and informed Tall's callous disregard for human life. But here's what stunned director Terrence Malick. Nolte began incorporating his own struggles with addiction and rage into Tall's character, creating a performance so authentically volatile that other actors were genuinely intimidated by his presence. During Tall's explosive scenes, Nolte's anger felt so real that cast members worried he was having actual psychological breakdowns rather than delivering scripted performances. The most disturbing aspect of Nolte's method acting was how he used his personal experience with self-destruction to understand Tall's moral emptiness. Nolte had battled alcoholism and legal troubles throughout his career, and he channeled that experience of hitting bottom into portraying a character who had sacrificed his humanity for professional advancement. The result was a performance that felt less like acting and more like psychological excavation. Nolte's deleted scenes included extensive backstory about Tall's pre-war life and the personal failures that drove his desperate need for military glory. These scenes, if included, would have made Tall a more sympathetic character. But Malik's editing favored him as a symbol of institutional evil rather than a complex human being. Nolte later said he understood Malik's choice, but regretted that audiences never saw the full psychological portrait he had created. The star casualties. The most shocking aspect of The Thin Red Line wasn't what made it into the final cut, but what Terrence Malick ruthlessly eliminated: entire performances by major stars who thought they were playing significant roles. These weren't minor trims for pacing. They were complete character assassinations that left careers damaged and egos shattered. Adrien Brody's experience became legendary in Hollywood circles as a cautionary tale about working with Malick. Brody had been told he was playing one of the film's lead characters, spent months preparing physically and emotionally for the role, and gave what he considered his best performance to date. When he attended the film's premiere, he discovered that his substantial part had been reduced to 2 brief scenes without dialogue. Brody was so shocked that he had to leave the theater, feeling betrayed by a director he had trusted completely. Mickey Rourke's deleted subplot would have marked his dramatic comeback years before The Wrestler. Rourke played a career soldier struggling with the moral compromises of military life, delivering performances that cast members described as his most powerful work since the 1980s. But Malick's philosophical vision had no room for Rourke's gritty realism, and an entire storyline that could have revitalized his career ended up on the cutting room floor. Bill Pullman's experience was perhaps the most professionally devastating. Cast as a major supporting character, Pullman had relocated his family to Australia for months of filming, only to discover that his substantial role had been reduced to a few minutes of screen time. Industry insiders reported that Pullman's agents were furious, but there was no recourse against a director whose artistic vision trumped all contractual obligations. The most shocking casualty was Martin Sheen, whose philosophical kernel was completely removed from the final film. Sheen had prepared extensively for scenes where his character would debate the nature of war and leadership with other officers, but Malick decided these conversations were too conventional for his experimental approach. An entire subplot about military leadership and moral responsibility simply vanished. Production in paradise. The filming of The Thin Red Line in the tropical wilderness of Queensland, Australia, became its own epic journey into madness, where Terrence Malick's obsession with natural beauty collided with the practical demands of creating a major war film. But the secrets of what really happened during those months in paradise reveal a production where traditional filmmaking logic completely collapsed. The most surreal aspect was Malick's filming schedule, which followed natural light patterns rather than conventional production timelines. He would halt dramatic scenes to film insects for hours, capturing close-ups of grass swaying in the wind while expensive actors waited in full military gear. Crew members reported days where more footage was shot of flora and fauna than of human performers, creating a bizarre atmosphere where nature was the true star of the production. But the tropical environment created genuine dangers that mirrored the wartime setting. Cast members suffered from heat exhaustion, tropical diseases, and injuries from the rough terrain. The humidity was so intense that camera equipment frequently malfunctioned, and several actors required medical treatment for infections caused by cuts from jungle plants. Jim Caviezel nearly drowned during a river sequence when swift currents swept him downstream. The most expensive production secret was Malick's perfectionism with natural lighting, which meant that entire scenes were reshot multiple times to capture specific qualities of sunlight filtering through trees. Weather delays became so common that the production schedule became meaningless, with actors remaining on standby for weeks while Malick waited for perfect atmospheric conditions. The philosophical war film. The Thin Red Line represented Terrence Malick's radical attempt to transform the war film genre into something approaching religious meditation. But the secrets behind his philosophical approach reveal a director more interested in exploring consciousness than depicting combat. Malick wasn't making a movie about World War II. He was creating a spiritual inquiry that happened to use warfare as its setting. The most revolutionary aspect was Malick's treatment of violence, which he filmed like a natural disaster rather than human action. Battle scenes were composed to emphasize the beauty of explosions, the graceful movements of soldiers through landscapes, and the way gunfire disturbed bird flights and insect activity. This approach horrified military advisors who expected realistic combat sequences, but it served Malik's vision of war as a disruption of natural harmony. Malik's use of voiceover narration was unprecedented in its scope and ambition. Rather than providing plot exposition, the internal monologues explored questions about existence, mortality, and spiritual meaning that had nothing to do with military objectives. These philosophical meditations, delivered by multiple characters, created a collective consciousness that transcended individual perspectives and approached something like universal human reflection. The most shocking aspect of Malik's vision was his complete disregard for traditional character development and plot structure. He was more interested in capturing moments of spiritual awakening than in following narrative arcs, which meant that conventional story elements were sacrificed for philosophical exploration. Audiences expecting a traditional war film found themselves watching something closer to experimental poetry. The thin red line proved that sometimes the greatest battles are fought in the editing room. Malik didn't just make a war film, he waged war against filmmaking itself. Subscribe to discover more shocking secrets from Hollywood's most mysterious productions.